However you're joining us, either in Zoom or watching on YouTube, welcome and thank you for being here. So all during the month of March, we've been celebrating the amazing diversity of herptiles, from snakes to salamanders, axolotls to alligators, and all kinds of reptiles and amphibians in between. Today's topic is on freshwater turtles, something that I personally have no clue about, which is why I am super excited to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Grover Brown. He is a herpetologist, ecologist, and assistant professor at Jacksonville State University, and his research has mostly been focused on the ecology and evolutionary history of freshwater turtles across the Southeastern United States, which is actually a global biodiversity hotspot. He'll be talking about the many types of turtles native to this region, what they look like, where to find them, what they do, and probably most importantly, why we should protect and study them. If you have any questions or comments during this presentation, type them in the chat on either platform. Our moderator will be checking both Zoom and YouTube, so remember to be polite and keep things on topic. We'll gather all the questions, and at the end, there'll be time for Dr. Brown to answer as many as they can. And we're going to start off the chat with an icebreaker question. So what is your favorite type of turtle? Again, I don't know much about turtles, so I don't really have a favorite. Probably all of them. Is that an answer? I don't know. What's your favorite turtle, Dr. Brown?
I think I have the same answer. I think it's all of them. But if I had to pick one turtle in particular, is probably the top turtle on this introduction slide, because I spent my dissertation studying this particular species, and it's one that's near and dear to my heart for many reasons.
Awesome. Well, if you want to go ahead and get started, we will hand over the presentation to you. Hand over virtually, of course.
Of course. Thank you, R, for that introduction. And again, if y'all want to put your favorite turtle in the chat, I'll be actually really interested to see some of the answers that y'all come up with. As R said, today I'm going to be talking about freshwater turtle diversity in the Southeast U.S. And I am an assistant professor at Jacksonville State University. I just started here last fall. We're a small school in Northeast Alabama, nestled into the mountains of Northeast Alabama, which, yes, do exist. I wanted to give you a little more feedback on me. So this is my family photo. I promise this is pertinent. But this is the whole family. My mom's side, very, very big family. This is all the aunts, uncles, and cousins. This is me in the front row. And what you can't see in this photo very well is that I actually have in my lap a box turtle. This is the first box turtle or first turtle of any variety that I ever, encountered. And this is like a fundamental memory for me. Since that day, since I found that turtle, not a day's gone by where I didn't think of them. And I've been exceptionally lucky to be able to follow my passion from the right age of 4, which you see here, through my college years. So I went to the University of Georgia for my undergraduate. And this was during one of the herpetologic field trips. This is an eastern box turtle that we had found. And so my undergraduate research actually focused more on salamanders, because our resident herpetologist was more of a salamander guy. But I did get out as much as I could to, look for turtles, because they had always held my captivation. While in school, I was very lucky to be able to study abroad. And so I got to spend about 4 months in Costa Rica. And the whole time, I'm always looking for turtles. And this was actually a scorpion mud turtle that I jumped into a sewage ditch to retrieve, and all smiles despite being covered in actual sewage. After I graduated college, I moved abroad. So I actually moved to Vietnam, where I was working with a critically endangered and highly localized endemic. What that means is this turtle that I'm holding on the right is only known from a few provinces in central Vietnam and nowhere else in the world. And so I was working on a project to help, learn more about them and how to conserve them. On the left, we were actually paddling on a very large reservoir in North Vietnam. This was the means of transportation of the local people. Apparently, I was one of the first Westerners to be able to master this technique, but we were looking for giant Asiatic softshell turtles. These are softshell turtles that grow to be about 500 or 600 pounds, and there's very few left in the world. And so we were using those fish finders to basically scan the bottom of this reservoir to see if we could find this particular individual in this particular reservoir. And then when in Rome, or I guess when in that hemisphere, I actually swung through and helped a few grad students out in Australia, where I encountered my first ever pleurodires. And by the end of this talk, you'll know what a pleurodire is. But these are snake neck turtles. So this turtle has proportionately the longest neck to shell ratio of any turtle in the world. And this was just outside of Perth, Australia, in the southwest portion of Australia. And then I came back stateside and began my graduate studies, again, studying that turtle that you saw on my intro slide, the striped neck musk turtle. And this is a turtle that I was, that I was working with for my PhD. But while looking for my tiny musk turtles, I often encountered a number of these slightly larger alligator snapping turtles in the rivers of South Mississippi. So I did my PhD at the University of Southern Mississippi, and I finished that back in 2020. And I actually finished the day before the country shut down for COVID. And that was completely unplanned, I was very lucky. I had I think the last in-person dissertation defense, probably in the nation. And again, this was just me a few weeks ago. In my spare time, this is all I do, is go look for turtles. And I truly, like I said, have been very, very fortunate to be able to follow my passion up to my current position, where I am a biologist at Jacksonville State University, and my lab and most of my research does focus on freshwater turtles. If you're interested in learning more about the natural history of turtles here in the Southeast, I do have an Instagram page that is devoted solely to turtles, turtle conservation, turtle education. So you can find that at Grover Brown, and please give a follow if you are interested in that. Now, one of the first questions I get when I start talking about turtles is people like, Grover, what is the difference between a turtle, a tortoise, and a terrapin? And I'm here to tell you exactly what that is. So if you wanted to, I guess, define the study of turtles, you could call it testudinology or kelionology. Either would be appropriate, but no one uses it. Turtles, of course, are a reptile, and so they kind of fit in the broader umbrella of herpetology. And now, when it comes to what is a turtle, tortoise, or terrapin, turtles, tortoises, and terrapins are kinds of turtles. So all tortoises are turtles, and all terrapins are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises and terrapins. That's a lot to say. But the order Testudines is all turtles. And turtles typically is a term that we use to describe those turtles that live in freshwater environments, like this map turtle you see on the far left. Now, a tortoise is a land-dwelling turtle in the family Testudinidae, which again, by the end of this talk, you'll know exactly what a testudinid is. But these are, again, primarily terrestrial. They tend to have elephantine feet versus, say, the webbed feet of an aquatic turtle. And they live in and can live in very arid environments. That's not to say that they always live in arid environments. That is to say things like deserts or dry areas. And then lastly, terrapins, again, are a subset of turtles. These are turtles that live in marshes, so where freshwater meets saltwater. And the turtle that we have on the right here is a diamondback terrapin from South Mississippi, but you folks in North Carolina have these in your marshes along the Atlantic seaboard as well. So these actually range all the way from about New Jersey in the Northeast, or what I consider the Northeast, all the way down the coast around Florida to the coast of Texas. So a very wide-ranging species. And I'll talk more on them a little bit later too. So turtles, turtle biology, turtle ecology I just find it infinitely interesting. And we really have learned so much about turtles just really in the past century. So the father of turtle biology is Archie Carr. Now, Archie Carr had a very long and productive career at the University of Florida from about, he started there around the time of the Depression, so maybe late 1920s, and I believe his career spanned into the 1960s at Florida. And he trained some of the most preeminent turtle biologists in the world. And he spent most of his career studying these turtles that you see here, the green sea turtles. And of course, there's a robust population of these that nest in Florida, but he spent most of his time in Central America. In fact, he raised most of his kids in Honduras when he and his wife moved from Florida to Honduras to study these marine turtles. Now, historically, I guess at about this time, very, very little was known about sea turtles. It was thought that they matured in 5 or 6 years. And of course, they were consumed by native people, and there were even turtle fisheries in Florida. And so it was thought, okay, yeah, these turtles are widespread, they're abundant, but they began to decline. And so Archie Carr was looking at the reasons why this was. What he found is he actually had this ingenious idea to tag turtles. And he put in English and Spanish these little tags on their flippers that said, if you find or catch this turtle, please call us at this number, and we have a reward for you. And what they found out is that these turtles migrate far and wide. So they congregate on these nesting beaches, and it was thought that they just, live offshore and do their thing. But really and truly, they're traveling hundreds, if not thousands of miles across the Caribbean. And this was something that was wholly new. We had no idea that these turtles were traveling so widely. And we actually had no data on, how long it takes these turtles to mature. And so that's what he began to do. And he was really the first to discover that turtles are extremely long-lived, and that these females coming to nest are decades old. They're not 5 or 6 years old. They can be 50 or 60 years old or more. And so by harvesting too many of them, we're not allowing the environment enough time to replace them. And he was very interested in tracking their movements. And so I love these photos of Archie because this was a time before radio telemetry, before satellite telemetry, and he wanted to know where these things went. So on the right, you can actually see him attaching a weather balloon to a nesting female so that he could follow her in the distance. He could just follow the balloon for a few days to see where she went. And I can only imagine this poor turtle bobbing like a cork, having been tied to this weather balloon, all in, an attempt to study their movements. But Archie Carr, he wrote the first handbook on turtles that published in 1952. It's really the first comprehensive book on turtles. And Archie, at this time, scientific writing for a lot of us may not be the most interesting writing in the world. But Archie Carr was a naturalist. And I highly recommend reading anything he's ever written because he has such a way with words. And his description of the turtle is amongst my favorites. So this is an excerpt from his Handbook of Turtles. And it starts off by saying that 200 million years ago, the reptiles, newly arisen from an uncommonly doughy set of amphibians, were on the verge of great adventure. They bore the mark of destiny in the shape of impervious scales, that is the scales on their arms and legs, and a new cunning to lay shelled eggs, versus, amphibians, which lay these gelatinous eggs. The first of the innovations made by stem reptiles, these early reptiles, was in a way the most extraordinary and ambitious of all. The most drastic departure from the basic reptile plan ever attempted before or since. The new animal was a turtle, having once performed the spectacular feat of getting its girdles, that is, say, its pectoral girdles or shoulders, and pelvic girdles or its pelvis, inside of its rib cage. It lapsed into a state of complacent conservatism, so unchanging, that has been the chief mark of the breed ever since. Of course, the turtle was not created overnight. Just when he was finished is not clear. And so he touches on a lot of really interesting concepts I'm going to break down in the next few slides. And that is that turtles are a drastic departure from all of the reptiles that we're familiar with, right? We typically think of, lizards having 4 limbs and, scaly back, but turtles have this bony shell. It has a bony upper part called the carapace, which is actually the fusion of its backbones and its ribs. So turtles, they don't move into larger shells as they mature. They grow with their shell. It is bone, and they actually have nerves and receptors within that bone. So turtles can actually feel you when you touch them. And so the top of the shell is called the carapace. The bottom of the shell is called the plastron. And of course, in this diagram here of a box turtle, you can see how this particular species can retract its head and its limbs inside of its shell And if you look at the bottom right, the closed up portion, it can squeeze tight shut and, have room for all of that. Now, if we were to try to do this, if we were to try to, fit our shoulders and hips inside of a rib cage, it would look something about like this. So this is a graphic from a book published in Japanese, where it shows anatomically what humans would look like if we were built like a turtle or like a snake. And so again, this goes to show how awkward, how true it is for turtles to have evolved over time to move their pectoral and pelvic girdles inside the rib cage. And it's hard to think of kind of that intermediate, right? Like as that turtle is evolving, as those features are migrating, how was that particular lineage successful? How did they move? What was their ecology? And that's still unknown. So that goes back to what Archie Carr was saying. It wasn't created overnight. Just how it was created is still a bit unsure. And that's not changed since 1952 when that book was published. So what are turtles exactly? Well, this is where we can go into the more recent, what we call peer-reviewed literature in biology. So these are studies that kind of investigate where turtles fit on the evolutionary tree of life. And this is a paper from the Schaefer lab at UCLA, and they did a phylogenomic analysis of turtles. Now, what this means is they looked at the genetics of turtles, these very, very conserved regions of DNA, to see where they fit in the tree of life. Whoops. And so their results found that turtles are actually sisters or sister on the tree of life to crocs and birds. So crocs and birds make up a monophyletic group called Archosauria. This also includes the now extinct dinosaurs. Well, not fully extinct. Birds are reptilian dinosaurs. But it placed turtles next to the next to the archosaurs in a group called Archelosaurs. And that is sister to things like the squamates or the snakes and lizards. And so the earliest turtles, we see them pop up, eons ago. One thing I think about is so cool about turtles is something else that Archie Carr mentioned, is that they just entered into this state of complacent conservatism. And so before we had the turtles as we know them, these really cool shelled creatures, we think we have kind of a vague idea of where they came from. And so the first fossils of what we think are like pre-turtles, kind of proto-turtles, come from Unitosaurus. And these were from the Permian. Now, this was 265 million years ago. This is a really, really long time ago. You start to see this lizard-like creature that's starting to expand its rib cages and starting to have a similar kind of breathing system and morphology to what will eventually eventually become turtles. Papacheles popped up around 240 million years ago, right after the Permian extinction. Now, the Permian extinction, if y'all had any dinosaur lectures this particular month, this was about 250 million years ago. It was called the Great Death, all right? Where like 75% of animals living on the Earth's surface went extinct, and almost 90% of aquatic creatures went extinct. So what this did, is it created a lot of opportunity for these early turtles. So maybe there was kind of this lack of competition that, again, allowed turtles to move from this lizard-like form through that really awkward stage of trying to get those pectoral and pelvic girdles inside the rib cage into this organism called Papacheles, which is starting to see a fusion of ribs, just like we see in modern day turtles. And the first kind of turtle that we see is from a fossil deposit in China, and this was Odontocheles. Now, if you go to your orthodontist, odonto means tooth or had teeth. So Odontocheles was actually a primitive turtle that had teeth, and it only had a plastron. It only had the bottom part of the shell. Now, they don't know if this is because the shell evolved from the bottom up, or if perhaps this turtle had already secondarily lost its carapace, because it wasn't long after that we see the fossils of Proganocheles. Now, this is the first turtle where, like, if you went back 220 million years, you're like, that is a turtle. That is a turtle, and I recognize it right off the bat because it's built just like turtles that we see today. In fact, the skeleton and the morphology is very similar to the eastern snapping turtles that you might see in your backyard or your backyard pond. And so when you look at the lineage of turtles, the earliest that we had were these Proganocheles. These were like, okay, the turtles. These are the ones we look at. They don't have teeth. They look like modern day turtles. And so they're kind of these proto-turtles. You then have another branch called the Myeloanids. And I'm going to mention them because they're, one, fascinating, but two, they were this close, this deeply divergent group of turtles that were this close to making it to modern day. And then we have what we call the crown turtles. So these are the ancestors of what we call extant turtles, those turtles that still exist today. And so I say that I want to give the Myeloanids a shout out because this was a family of turtles, the Myeloanidae, that were 8 feet long, or up to 8 feet long, terrestrial tortoises that had horns and spines projecting from behind the head and a club tail that they used for defense. And these persisted up until the late Pleistocene, that is about the time of, say, woolly mammoths, which wasn't that long ago, about 10,000 years ago. They occurred on this planet with people. However, the last population of Myeloanids was on an atoll, which is a geologic feature, basically coral reef that formed, sea level dropped, and you kind of create a landscape that's fleeting. It erodes over time. So literally the last population of these just kind of sank into the sea in the past few thousand years. So imagine an 8-foot long tortoise with horns coming out of his head. And now this cute little guy in the top right here, whoops, so sorry. The cute little guy that you see in the top right, this is Ninjames. Let me see if I can type that out. Ninjames. Nijemeys, which literally translates from the Latin to ninja turtle. So this extinct species was described and named the Ninja Turtle. So Ninja Turtles do exist, or kind of asterisk, they did exist at one point. Now, getting into, there we go. Getting into modern day turtles, we have another publication from the Schaefer Lab in UCLA that again looked at the phylogeny, or the family tree of extant turtles. So turtles that are still around today. And now this figure is going to be a little busy. I pulled it straight from the paper. But what it does is it shows the 14 families of turtles that we still have. And one thing I want you to notice is that it's dated on the bottom, all right? This is a timeline of when these different families split from one another. And so the first major split that we see in turtles is here almost 200 million years ago. So there's a group of turtles that I'm going to talk about on the next slide called the pleurodires and the chelids, chelids are a pleurodire. And these are the side neck turtles. And so you'll see they're going to pull their head in laterally to form an S. And this is different from all the turtles that you would see in North Carolina or in the Southeast. We only have cryptodires, crypto meaning hidden. So they hide their necks by pulling it straight back. And so the pleurodires are only found in continents on the southern hemisphere. So that snake neck turtle that I showed you on that second slide when I was kind of giving my introduction, that is a pleurodire. And the reason I had never seen one before is because that was my first time visiting a continent of the southern hemisphere, in that case, Australia. But you also see these in South America and Africa. And what's so neat is that when you look at how old the lineage of turtles is, think back to the Tyrannosaurus, right? This went extinct 65 million years ago. And that's like relatively recent in the timescale of turtle, right? Turtles predated the T-Rex by almost 160 million years, okay? The T-Rex went extinct during the KT extinction event about 65 million years ago. But again, turtles originated 220 million years ago. And so these are the other families of turtles. I'm going to touch on a few of the ones that we have here in the Southeast, but this is the rest of that figure. So turtles are comprised of about 350 species. And this study was remarkable in that it had genetic samples from most of those species. But one thing, I might mention it. I guess I will. Within the hidden neck turtles that we have, say, in North Carolina and the Southeast, we've perhaps heard of the soft-shelled turtles, which again, a deeply divergent lineage of turtle that split from things like a box turtle or a snapping turtle 150 million years ago. So it's just so funny that they can be so deeply divergent, but that they are immediately recognizable as a turtle. So those two groups of turtles that I was telling you about, the cryptodires and the pleurodires. The pleurodires, when they pull their neck in, here's the pleurodire here, they form an S, but it's laterally. So they pull it into the side like this. This causes them to give you the permanent side eye, okay? So when they're retracted in the shell, there's always an eye out there looking at you. Versus the cryptodires, like this northern map turtle here, which you have in Western North Carolina, pulls its head straight back. And so it forms an S in kind of the vertical side view. And these are going to be all the turtles that we have in North America, because remember, these are only found in the Southern Hemisphere. And so now that we've kind of introduced turtles, one thing I like to do is talk about how turtles have contributed greatly to the STEM fields. So STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we perhaps recognize this image of Charles Darwin here. And now Charles Darwin, of course, was renowned for developing his theory of natural selection. That is, modification with descent. And of course, a lot of credit generally goes to his finches, Darwin's finches, yada, 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 okay? Well, while he was on the HMS Beagle, of course, he's visiting these Galapagos Islands, and he's seeing not only these finches, but these tortoises. And from island to island, they vary dramatically. And they really did help to shape his understanding of natural selection, because this tortoise you see on the left, this is a species of Galapagos tortoise that occurs on islands that don't really have short grasses. They have these cacti, like you can see the back here, with these really high pads. And so these tortoises have evolved over time to be really tall, have a very tall shell, and a very long neck to reach that food resource. Whereas on these islands where there are more herbaceous plants, lower plants, you see this more typical tortoise form. So relatively domed shell. It doesn't need to reach real high to pluck, say, a prickly pear fruit from a cactus or something. Now, how did these tortoises get across all these islands? Well, tortoises are actually very good at seafaring. Now, they're not good swimmers, right? Turtles are the swimmers. Tortoises, however, are great at floating. This is another species of giant tortoise, the Aldabra tortoise. It occurs in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The reason they get so big is because they can float to these far-flung islands, colonize them, and basically fill that role of a large herbivore, something like a cow, right? And so they get real big, they eat this vegetative matter. Cows are not naturally going to make it to these islands because they can't float for 6 to 8 weeks at a time like this tortoise did. And we know that this tortoise floated for at least that long because, one, it was spotted out in the ocean. It floated to the east coast of Africa. And these are barnacles. These are not scales. On this right picture here, those are barnacles that grew on this tortoise while it was floating out at sea for weeks at a time. And so this, of course, allowed tortoises to distribute or to migrate from one island of the Galapagos to another and take on these many different forms. So the Galapagos tortoise is actually a complex of species. Each had a slightly different morphology, which again really helped Darwin to come up with these early theories of natural selection and the evolutionary process. So thank turtles for our concept of evolutionary biology. Now, tortoises, these giant tortoises that we've been talking about, played a really important role in early exploration. So think of all those early explorers like Cortez, and I don't know history, so I don't know some of the other early explorers, but like Cortez and anyone got one in the chat? Nothing? That's okay. In the chat, someone did ask what they eat while they float. They don't eat. Their metabolism is very slow. And that's what made them ideal for these early explorers, because what they could do is, these explorers are suffering from malnutrition while out at sea. And they would find these islands with these giant tortoises weighing several hundred pounds. And they would put them below deck where they would literally last for up to a year without food or water. Remember, tortoises live in very harsh environments. They don't always have access to fresh water. So they have a very large bladder that holds fresh water. And during times where fresh water was scarce, they would slaughter these tortoises and they'd be able to drink from the bladder. And then, of course, they had a supply of fresh meat for up to a year later. And so they actually decimated population of Galapagos tortoises and Aldabra tortoises across the world because they were used to basically feed these early explorers who discovered the New World, right? And so a lot of us may not be here had it not been for tortoises sustaining the early explorers. So this is a figure taken. It says this giant Galapagos tortoise walked the decks of the USS Albatross in 1891 until its services were required at the dinner table. Unfortunately, yes, Skelly, tragic, but tasty. Now, y'all may have heard of these tortoises being used by early explorers, but did you know that tortoises also paved the way for space exploration? Kid you not. So tortoises were sent up in early Russian space shuttles because, this was a new frontier. We didn't understand, exactly what space would do, say, to the human body. So they were sending up things like insects and rodents and primates, so chimpanzees and tortoises, to study the effects of the vacuum of space on these different vertebrate groups. And so during this time, they sent up 2 Russian tortoises in 1968, and they exposed the tortoises to the vacuum of space, and they survived the vacuum of space longer than any other creature that they put up there. They lasted for hours. And I'll talk about some of the really cool adaptations that tortoises have and other turtles have for these, what we call anoxic environments, environments without oxygen. Okay, so you've gone, let's see, what all have we done in the STEM? So science and biology, technology, we've kind of gotten into space exploration, but also engineering. So the contributions that turtles have made to engineering is, there's a study from Georgia Tech, actually, where they were studying the mobility of hatchling sea turtles. Think of how versatile a baby sea turtle is. It is able to dig out of the nest, traverse very fine sand, traverse very hard sand, and then immediately move into swimming. They are an all-terrain vehicle, and they're very, very efficient. And so there was a student at Georgia Tech who was looking at how they're able to traverse all these different media, all these different textures, and there could potentially be some application to space exploration again. So creating these rovers that would be able to, if we did find some planet or moon that had terrestrial and aquatic environments, that you can model them after these hatchling sea turtles to be able to navigate both of those media. So again, turtles just have been around for so long, I like to say, that they've literally figured it all out. Now, some more on turtle physiology, so how they work, and some of the adaptations that they have. This is Jonathan the tortoise. He is an Aldabra tortoise, though he doesn't live in Aldabra anymore. He actually lives on the remote island of St. Helena, which is right here. And he has lived there for hundreds of years. So Jonathan the tortoise turned 190 years old earlier this year. So this was published January 20th, 2022, making him the oldest known tortoise ever. All right. And that's just that we've documented, right? We haven't been studying turtles that long, but they found him at a certain size and they knew he had to be at least a certain age as an adult. And he's lived on St. Helena for, I think, well over 140 years. So he is blind, I think, in both eyes, sorry. So they're covered by cataracts, but he's still going strong. And it's not just the giant tortoises that live for centuries. Even the humble box turtles have been known to live well past that century mark. So before, I don't know, you and I used to, put a little fingernail polish on the bottom of them to see if we recognize the same box turtle year after year. People used to carve their initials in their name. And so in this particular individual here, you see July 22nd, 1860. And this was a turtle that was found, I believe, in, I think, the 1970s or 1980s, making it, at least 100 years old since it was marked. but it was obviously marked as an adult turtle. Or it was marked as an adult turtle because look at how large the initials that they carved into it were. So they carved it in as an adult. Likewise, this is an individual from Virginia that had 1913 written on it, and it was found in 2010. So it's thought to be at least 100 or well over 100 years old because, again, marked as an adult, completely smooth plastron, which is indicative, again, of a very old species. So it's really and truly not just these giant tortoises that are capable of living past that century mark. It's a number of turtle species. Even some of the freshwater turtles that you see basking on logs can live 40, 50, 60 years. We really don't know because I just started my career as a biologist here at Jacksonville State University. If I'm lucky to have a 50-year career, which is not going to happen because I'd probably retire before then. But I mean, I would only have a snapshot of, the life of a turtle. So it takes several generations. I'd have to train up my kids and my kids' kids to kind of follow these populations to get a real understanding of how long some of these turtles can live. And so they've actually been studied. It's advancing on its own. I don't know why. But they've been used in gerontological studies, so studies of aging, which have benefited people. So turtles are used to study basically our own biology and why we age, because turtles, you're going to have a 100-year-old female. She's still fertile. She can still produce viable eggs. So they don't go through any sort of menopause. They're no more prone to cancers or things like joint degradation, no more prone to arthritis, unlike us as we age. Turtles are, some freshwater turtles, I should say, are very interesting in that they can actually draw some oxygen from the water without their lungs. So aquatic turtles have lungs, but they also have skin that can pull oxygen from the water, or specialized tissue in the case of the Fitzroy River turtle. So it can actually take in, believe it or not, water through its cloaca, which is where it does, its business. It does 1, 2, and that's where its reproductive parts are also held. But it can bring in water through there into these specialized pouches called Bursay sacs, and they can actually get oxygen from that water and a phenomenon that we commonly call butt breathing. So yes, turtles can in fact breathe out of their butts. And the Fitzroy River turtle of Australia is very good at this, can get up to 70% of its oxygen from the water itself, so without even coming up for air. But we do have a turtle in our backyard that has a very interesting physiology to address similar concepts. So the painted turtle has the largest distribution of any freshwater turtle in the US. So it ranges all the way from New Orleans to southern Canada. And of course, at those northerly latitudes, it's gonna be under a sheet of ice for most of the year. And so what's really interesting is whenever that pond freezes over up north, it reduces its body temperature to make sure its metabolism, or it reduces body temperature and its metabolism to virtually zero. You got a few heartbeats a minute, you got a few neurons snapping up in the brain to keep it active, but basically it's in a state of suspended animation. And it is physically unable to reach the surface. Again, there's a sheet of ice there to respire, and it buries into the mud, and slowly over the course of a month, its lungs physically collapse from the diffusion of gas into a water or into a liquid. So what's this turtle to do? Well, it no longer has oxygen for respiration. There's no oxygen in mud because all the bacteria use it up. So this particular turtle goes into anoxic respiration, so respiration without oxygen. Now, you and I do this. If I were to race you around a track, that first 100 meters, we're feeling good, feeling fast. Second 100 meters, feeling a little more fatigued. That third leg, that 300-meter mark, we're really breathing hard, and then our legs turn to jelly as we cross that finish line, right? The reason our legs turn to jelly is because we are going through anaerobic respiration. We're breaking down a glucose molecule and getting a little bit of energy from it, but we're creating a dangerous byproduct, lactic acid, right? Lactic acid builds up, our blood pH drops, we're dead. We go into a coma and we die. These turtles do that, and they can actually tolerate 10 times more acid in their blood as you and I. And once they get to this point, it's been probably a few months, but turtles go one step further, as they tend to do. And a turtle is mostly shell, mostly bone. So they'll dissolve a portion of their shell into calcium carbonate to neutralize that acid. Think of adding vinegar, which is an acid, to baking soda, and we watch it fizz, right? It turns into salt and a water, neither of which are acidic. So it's able to neutralize its bloodstream to persist under a sheet of ice for almost 7 or 8 months at a time. So it can literally hold its breath, have its lungs collapse, and persist for 7 months without taking a single breath. It's truly wild. They push it to the limit. There's a great book called Life in a Shell by a physiologist who built his career at Brown University studying the physiology of painted turtles. Now, turtles are not dumb. I think I've established that already. There's actually a few species of turtle in South America that have their own little language. So these turtle species, the Amazonian river turtles, are part of this really cool branch of herpetology coming up, or that's kind of emerging, where there's these turtles that all nest together in what we call these arybalas. The females nest communally. They lay their eggs, and it used to be thought that, female turtles, set it and forget it, right? They lay the eggs, they walk off, no maternal care. Well, not only is this not true, these females of this particular species will nest together where they're communicating. They have a series of subsonic clicks. We can't hear them, but we can pick it up with sound instruments. And so these females all emerge together and they nest together. These eggs incubate, and the turtles within the eggs can actually communicate with one another. So if you take experimentally an underdeveloped egg and put it with a more developed nest, they'll communicate, and the underdeveloped egg will increase its metabolism so it can hatch with all those other turtles that it thinks are its siblings at the same time to, again, emerge together, move to the water together. And believe it or not, the moms are actually there waiting for them. And so the moms will communicate with the babies and migrate with them upstream to the productive nurseries. So there is this example of not only maternal care, but communication in turtle species. Again, they've been around so long that they've really thought of everything. And I know I'm getting a little short on time, but we're going to talk about why turtles are important. For instance, the gopher tortoise can house up to 350 species of other animals in its burrow, making it what we call a keystone species within its environment. So the health of the environment is really dependent on the health of the gopher tortoise population. Things like diamondback rattlesnakes and indigo snakes, skunks, coyotes, gopher frogs, all these organisms are known to use gopher tortoise burrows and many more. So they're really important to their ecosystems. All right, so those are turtles' contributions to the STEM fields. For the remainder of this talk, I'm going to be talking about turtle diversity in the Southeast because we are a biodiversity hotspot. Turtles, as we talked about, have been around for 1, maybe even 2 mass extinctions, including the one that took out the dinosaurs. We have 350 species worldwide, 14 families globally, 2 suborders that split 200 million years ago. But here in the Southeast, we have almost 50 species. That is a significant portion of the world's diversity. I live in Alabama. We have the highest diversity. We have 34 species, so we have about 10% of global diversity within the state. And that's more than the vast majority of countries on the planet. So when you think of turtle diversity, you might think it's going to be centered, in the Amazon or in the tropical rainforest across the equator, but it's not. It's up here in the temperate zones. So in temperate North America and temperate Asia. So the darker the color here, the higher the turtle diversity. And this is just zooming into Southeast Asia and the Southeast US to show that we have some of the highest turtle diversity, notably here at the Mobile Bay in South Alabama. And the warmer colors here indicate higher turtle diversity. So we are typically considered number 2 in the world, but I put a little asterisk there because this paper actually came out in 2008. And since then, we've actually described a number of other species across the Southeastern United States, which might actually make us the most diverse in all the world. And not only that, we probably have the highest abundance and diversity of turtles. So while Southeast Asia is very diverse in its turtle community and turtle species, a lot of them are actually teetering on the brink of extinction. And so it's really unfortunate. But a lot of our turtles here are quite common and can be found relatively easily. Why do we have this diversity? Well, the Southeast is a well-known biodiversity hotspot. We have the southern end of the Appalachian Mountains, which the Appalachian Mountains used to rival the Rockies, but they're 400 million years old. So they've eroded over time. And what this means is that they've always served as a refugia or a safe space, whether sea level was really high or sea level was really low. And it was also never glaciated. So during the Ice Age, there were no glaciers down here. So it's been, again, just kind of this nice little refugia. So you have a lot of time for species to evolve, a lot of different habitats from high mountain to coastal plain. And we also have a diversity of hydrologic units. That is to say, a number of different river systems. And so this promotes diversity not only of turtles, but of amphibians, of fishes, reptiles, trees, mammals, and birds. So we are extremely lucky in our biodiversity here in the Southeast. Now, one group of turtles that really exemplifies this diversity is going to be the map turtles. So the map turtles are our most speciose group of turtles. There are 14 species in the Southeast. There's one species in North Carolina, in Western North Carolina, the northern map turtle, this guy right here. And these are special because they occur in typically pairs. So you typically have two species within a drainage. You have a broad-headed species, which eats predominantly mollusks or very hard prey, so they need a big head to crush it. And an insectivorous species, a species that eats insects and has little tiny beaks for picking it off things. And so they're obviously a very attractive turtle, and they are found in individual river drainages. So the Mobile River has two species, the Alabama and the Black Knob Sawback. You go one drainage to the west, to the Pascagoula, two new species, or complete turnover species, the Pascagoula map turtle and the yellow blotch sawback. One more drainage to the west, you got the Pearl River and the ring sawback, another drainage to the west, rinse, lather, repeat. Now there are drainages like the Escambia, which just have a singular species. Sorry, someone's calling. Hang up on them. Y'all are more important at the moment. You do have some drainages that have only one species, like the Escambia. And so you have the Escambia map turtle. And these are just some of the drainages they occur across. So a different color corresponds to that species, but we're running short on time, so don't worry about that. But perhaps one of my favorite species of map turtles is the Barber's map turtle. It inhabits the Apalachicola River drainage. This is an individual I found in South Georgia, and this is a photo a friend of mine took. And this really exemplifies something interesting in the map turtles. Folks often look at this picture and go, oh, it's a mama and her baby. But actually, this is mom and that's dad. They have some of the most drastic sexual dimorphism or differences between the sexes of any vertebrate in the world. And so females, again, have this honking head for a diet of bivalves or things like clams and mussels. And the males tend to be insectivores. So they eat these aquatic insects, and it helps them not step on each other's toes. They're able to divide those niches so that they aren't competing with one another. And I know we're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to kind of breeze through the next few slides of some of our turtle diversity. So I apologize that we aren't getting as much time for them. I know a lot of us are interested in sea turtles. We have 5 of the 7 species of sea turtles here in the Southeast. We only lack the flatback sea turtle of Australia and the olive ridley sea turtle of the Pacific Ocean. And they all kind of divide in their diets. The loggerheads eat things like conchs and whelks. Hawksbill eat sponges. Kemp's ridley eat things like crabs. Green sea turtles are called green sea turtles because the fat deposits are green because they're herbivorous. So they eat lots of plants, and that chlorophyll manifests itself in their fat deposits. And then this is a leatherback sea turtle that I saw on the Georgia coast. And these are our largest sea turtle species, largest turtle species in the world. They can get up to 6 feet long in shell length and weigh more than 2,000 pounds. They have a global distribution, so they can occur even in the Scandinavian countries into the Arctic Circle because they function as a marine mammal, basically. They put on fat layers, and they're so large, is a term called gigantothermy, where when they flip, or I guess as they're swimming along and moving their flippers, the muscles burn so much energy, it creates heat. That heat's trapped inside the blubber. And so they're able to stay warmer than the surrounding environment and exploit these very productive waters of the Arctic Circle. And they eat a diet of almost exclusively jellyfish. They're what we call gelatinivores. And they're able to eat these jellyfish and actually, think of trying to swallow Jello in a pool, right? That'd be really hard. They have these downward facing spines in the back of their throat that they actually use to facilitate the movement of those jellyfish into their GI tract. Some of the common turtles that you're going to see in your backyard are going to be things like the sliders, the river cooters, and the painted turtles, which I saw a few of y'all in the chat have already seen. And so these are our common pond turtles. Now, they can be abundant, and people often ask me, they're eating all my fish, but none of these species actively chase down and eat fish. They're mostly herbivorous or eating things like your dead fish so that they don't putrefy and, cause your pond to go anoxic and to lose oxygen that sustains the other fishes. But I can answer that in the questions if we have time. Our box turtles, we have a couple different varieties in the Southeast. We have our eastern box turtles, which you have in North Carolina. And along the Gulf Coast, we have these massive box turtles called Gulf Coast box turtles. They're actually semi-aquatic. They can forage in these river floodplains up to 8 feet deep in water. So it's really cool. I have some friends who've worked with these. I saw someone mention their favorite turtle species was the bog turtle. You guys have some of the most robust populations of these in the country. They're a very rare turtle. They're very habitat specialists. They need open wet meadows or open bogs. I was fortunate enough to work with this species in North Georgia, where we have a few populations left. And so I was managing those for Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And this is one of the babies that I found. It was the first baby ever documented in the state of Georgia. So I was pretty excited about that. But very habitat specialists, unfortunately not doing well because much of their habitat's been ditched and drained and converted to agriculture. But there's some great people working with this species. We know a lot more about how to manage their habitat now, so hopefully we'll see population increases over the next few decades. That group of cryptodires I was telling you about, the soft shells that split 150 million years ago, we have a few species of these. We have the spiny soft shell, the smooth soft shell, and the Florida soft shell. Now, I think y'all get maybe a few coastal counties that have the Florida soft shell. These can weigh up to 96 pounds. So they're really, really impressive as adults, and they're very feisty. The best turtles are the musk turtles. They're called musk turtles because they secrete these foul-smelling musk whenever you catch them. These are the ones I did my dissertation on. So I have a very, very soft spot in my heart for all of them. Specifically, I studied the striped-necked musk turtle and the razorbacks. And like the map turtles, they tend to fall out across drainages, but I don't have much time to talk about my research today, so I'll kind of glean past that. Closely related to the musk turtles are the mud turtles. They're called, the scientific name for the eastern mud turtle, which y'all have in North Carolina, is Kinosternum subrubrum. Kinosternum means they can move their sternum, so they can close up like a box turtle. And then subrubrum means red underneath. And I can't imagine why they got that name, but these are a few babies I hatched out in 2020. I happened to across the mother as she was nesting, and I was like, I'll just throw this in the incubator and see what happens. And then those diamondback terrapins I was telling you about earlier, again, these occur from New Jersey to Texas. They live in these Spartina marshes, eating things like periwinkle snails, and just like the map turtles, getting these massive heads in the adult females. And then, of course, we have to close out talking about snappers. We have a couple species of snapping turtles in the Southeast, the common snapper, and then the alligator snapping turtle, which has recently been split into 3 species. Common snappers have a very long neck and a smooth shell, whereas typically the alligator snapping turtles have 3 defined ridges, a short neck, and a very hooked beak. A large common snapper is going to be about 30 pounds like this individual here, where of course the alligator snapping turtles can get a little bit bigger. So this is a 70-pound turtle that I'm holding on the left, but this is a 140-pound turtle that my friend Luke is holding on the right. And our colleagues in Texas caught recently a 214-pound alligator snapping turtle. So these are the largest turtle in North America. They have a lingual lure, so their tongue is shaped like a worm, and it's used to bring in fishes and turtles and anything else that might want to eat a worm. And then, of course, they snap shut those powerful jaws and crush whatever is entering. And so I hope that this has been interesting. The Southeast is really this incredible powerhouse of turtle diversity. Turtles have made massive contributions to the STEM field, so you should go home and thank a turtle. But most importantly, I want to highlight that many turtles are in trouble. And so there's a unfortunately, more than half of all turtles are listed as threatened or endangered. So do what you can to help a turtle. There's a number of organizations you can give to. But, even if you see a turtle crossing the road, if you're able to pull over safely, it's best to move that guy in the direction it was heading. Turtles don't do well with relocation. So I know it might seem like a dangerous place, but it's best just to move it where it's trying to get to. And I know I'm a little long on time, but if you did have any questions, I'm happy to stick around and facilitate any of those. I don't know if our Zoom link expires, but I'll turn it back over to R, and maybe you can read out some of the questions that folks have.
Yeah, so again, thank you for explaining everything about turtles. I learned like an entire encyclopedia's worth of knowledge, so thank you so much for speaking with us today. We are running close to time, so if you need to leave for audience members, if you have something else coming up, feel free to, but we are going to stick around to ask some of the questions. We had some really good questions come in, so we are going to go a little past that 2 o'clock time, just be able to ask some questions to get some answers in. No worries, Dr. Brown. I would rather have more information and go close to the time than not have that information at all. So it is totally fine. Again, if you need to leave, that's totally fine as well. But I am going to ask some of the questions. So you mentioned at the end there that a lot of turtles are facing extinction. We learned in our talk last week, living with crocodilians in North Carolina, that global warming and climate change is a big factor. Is there any sort of, are turtles also facing similar threats due specifically to climate change?
So that's a great question. Most turtles are doing poorly because of overconsumption. In Southeast Asia, especially, they're traditionally a food source for those people, and they're deeply tied into their traditional beliefs. And turtles truly abide by the slow and steady. So it sometimes takes turtles 10, 20 years to mature to reach sexual maturity. And the reason they live so long is to, over the course of a century, hopefully replace themselves in that environment. We know that baby turtles, as my friend describes them, are nature's crunchy grapes. Anything and everything eats them. So you have to produce a lot of baby turtles just for one to make it. And so when you are managing turtles, is very different than, say, white-tailed deer, which reproduce every single year. They have parental care. They kind of have a leg up in life. Whereas turtles, you have to manage for the long term. And unfortunately, that's really hard to do. Specifically with climate change, many turtles do have temperature-dependent sex determination, like alligators. So as we have a warming climate, we're starting to see more female-biased populations. But it's looking like some female turtles can actually seek out cooler temperature areas to lay eggs to produce more males. So there might be a way around it.
That is awesome. In our talk last week, they had mentioned the temperature determined sex determination, like that. That makes sense. Warmer temperatures, you're going to have a skew in the population. The temperature of the nest changes things. And then also during that talk, they had mentioned extreme weather and rising sea levels. Is that also a factor? Like changing sort of the environment, not temperature, but the physical.
You could see a loss of nesting beaches, right? For things like a number of sea turtle species with an increase in sea levels without kind of conversion of or erosion of these coastal areas into a new nesting beach, right? And more severe weather events are causing inundation of sea turtle nests. And so when those eggs are inundated or put underwater, the embryos drown. So you can see massive loss of recruitment from just one severe weather event, but we know that they're getting more intense and more severe each year. So there is some concern there as well.
That makes sense. Again, it's unfortunate, but makes sense. So we also had a question earlier in the presentation when you're talking about the evolution of turtles. What's the benefit of having those shoulder and hip joints in the shell? How does that help? What's the evolutionary benefit of that?
What are turtles renowned for? So what does the shell afford them? It's protection, right? So by having those girdles inside your rib cage, you're really not giving a predator anything to grab hold of, because you can pull those arms inside and those legs inside and close up tight like some box turtle and mud turtle species. And it's really it's protection, right? So it's taking the defensive. You're able to hide and with your hard exterior shell survive any sort of predation event.
Again, makes sense. I feel like that's going to be my phrase for the question session. It's just going to be makes sense.
Makes sense.
So what's the difference between a woodland box turtle and an eastern box turtle? That was during the part talking about the engraving the shells. There was a picture of both an eastern and a woodland. What's the difference between the two?
They're the same thing. Of course, in biology, we're fraught with these common names, which is why we use the Latinized version. So woodland box turtle, eastern box turtle, common box turtle, they're all Terrapinae carolina.
Again, makes sense. That's going to be my go-to.
Ambiguity.
Yeah, so we mentioned a little bit, Dr. Brown and I, before the talk started about snakes and how there's a similar common language issue about people calling snakes the same thing over and over again. How do you counter that with education and telling people about turtles? How do you sort of teach people and counter that idea of oh, I saw this type of turtle? Well, it's not quite that turtle. How do you kind of approach people about turtles if that's one of the issues? People don't know what they're called.
Well, thankfully, turtles. So with snakes, it's a little more troublesome, right? Because people want to kill snakes. There's this animosity towards them. Thankfully, most people don't want to kill turtles. And there are venomous snakes that can be confused with non-venomous. So with snakes, it's really important. Folks will see any snake and be like, "That's cottonmouth," and it's not always a cottonmouth. It could be a northern water snake. With turtles, the risk there is you're not running as great a risk. Like if you call a turtle by the wrong species, it's not going to be like, "Oh, well, we hate that species, we're going to kill it." So they don't suffer some of the same persecution as snakes. But I mean, one thing that I just want people to take away from this talk is that we do have an incredible diversity. So what you call a painted turtle, or what I've heard people call painted turtles, can be any number of species. So there's even more species out there than you might know of. And so pick up that field guide and start browsing it, and you'll kind of be amazed by the number of species that you'll have. It's more than you think.
So kind of related to that, is there any species of turtle that you want to see in the wild? I know you've had all kinds of research and encountered all kinds of turtles, but is there one either native to North Carolina or just in general in the world that you would really want to see in the wild?
So I'm one of those weird people. I teach an ornithology class as well. So I teach about birds, and birders are intense. Birders want to see all the species that they can. They'll get in a plane and fly across the nation. Well, I'm kind of like that with turtles. So I am trying to see every species in the United States of America, and I only lack a few. So I really need to take a trip to Texas, which I'm going to try to plan for this summer, to see some of those species that are endemic or only found in Texas. So I've seen every turtle species east of the Mississippi, and I just lack a few of those west of the Mississippi. So the turtle species I most want to see there's 2 species of map turtle in Texas, a species of slider, mud turtle, and cooter over there. So 5 species I'd like to see in Texas.
Well then, I'm not a turtle person, so I'm just amazed by that you've seen that many. What are some that we could see out and about right now, in North Carolina or in the Southeast in general? Is there a seasonal thing? What would be out in end of March, beginning of April?
You are about to see that big movement of turtles. So April, May, and June, females have suited up with their menses, and they are going to be out looking for places to nest. And so you'll often see them crossing roads, mostly because on the road margins you have nice sandy or gravelly soil, and you're going to start to see females moving around to nest. So you're going to see things like the common slider, also known as the yellow-bellied slider, or the invasive red-eared sliders, moving to nest. You'll see even the large snapping turtles. So you don't have alligator snapping turtles in North Carolina. You have the eastern snapping turtle, which can still get really sizable. And females in that species can move up to a mile to nest. So you'll see them lumbering across roads as well. Box turtles you'll see after some of these warmer spring rains. And actually right now in March, you're going to start to see male turtles moving from pond to pond looking for ladies. So it'll be turtles on the road until about July. So be careful when you're out there.
Awesome. That is very good to know. And then, so kind of starting to wrap things up a little bit, what advice would you give for any future scientists in the audience? Like, what are any tips or recommendations you might give to someone who wants to study turtles like you someday?
That's a great question. Basically, so for me, I was very lucky, like I said, in that I always knew I wanted to study turtles. And when I was in college, I applied for summer internships to, study either sea turtles like I did with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, or bog turtles like I did with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. So really getting involved in either research or work during your undergrad with the species, such that kind of sets you apart and sets you ahead if and when you're looking at grad schools. And then you can kind of find a lab that fits your research interest and pursue that career in either academia or just there's a number of different career routes that you could take, which is a whole nother talk. I give talks to undergraduates about how to kind of pursue that career, but you can go into academia or you can go into captive husbandry and like a zoo-like situation. You can go into state or federal work. There's really a lot of opportunities.
That is awesome. Lots of opportunities for all kinds of people, I hope. So thank you, Dr. Brown, for speaking with us today about turtles. Like I had mentioned many times before in this talk, I have learned so much. My base knowledge was nothing, and I feel like I've walked away knowing more about my home region of North Carolina, the amazing biodiversity of the Southeastern United States, and just the importance of turtles in general around the world. So thank you everyone for joining us today, both on Zoom and YouTube. Thank you for sticking around for the question session. Will be available on the museum's YouTube site afterwards. So in case you joined late, you just want to go back and look at some of the really awesome informative slides, you're more than welcome to do that. And again, happy Reptile and Amphibian Month. Check out on the website and have a great week. Bye everyone.
See ya.